For this demonstration, what I'm going to do is take you through the process of going through a smaller study and developing that smaller study with the goal of making a much larger painting. So what I'm going to do here is work out some of the issues, the compositional challenges, some of the color tones, textures, just get familiar with the subject so that when I go into the larger piece, I can do it with a little bit more confidence. I find that doing a smaller piece is always a lot easier than doing something that's very large. And it's easy to get lost in the piece and overwork areas. And so what I want to do here is create a roadmap that will give me the confidence to put on the big strokes of paint that are needed to create the same type of energy that I can get in some of my smaller pieces. Now, while I'm laying in some of these darks, I just want to talk for a minute about cityscapes in general. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for many years, and I found that San Francisco was such a great subject. It is very much like a jungle landscape. Of course, it's steel and concrete and, cars and all kinds of movement and colors and surfaces. And so it had its own kind of feel, almost like a rainforest jungle, but obviously, man-made, and has its kind of rhythms and kind of organic quality as one building goes up against another. And there are also, the trees planted on the sides of the roads. There's so much about this subject that can be painted, and it's very rich in its textures and ideas also, just the way that we relate to cities. To some degree, they have a certain stress level associated with them. It's not necessarily a peaceful thing. It's more maybe exciting or busy, or, you think about work. There are a lot of different emotions that people have when dealing with a landscape like this. And so I like to address those kinds of issues and those thoughts in a painting of the city. Now, I mentioned San Francisco, and that's where I really learned about cityscapes and thinking about the city, just living there, working there, studying at the Academy of Art University. And so it just made a huge impact on me. And so I have also traveled around the world looking at other cities and just understanding also that their rhythms and their different types of vibe that they have. And so this one is actually not San Francisco. This is Los Angeles. And downtown Los Angeles also has a certain feel to it. It has a quality of light that's unique. It also has the color temperature of the buildings, the color of the roads. Everything has a little bit different or unique feel to it. And so I want to make sure and kind of capture some of those elements to give that feeling of the city. But what I don't want to do is necessarily make a literal interpretation of the city. I want to be able to create the mood without having so many specifics, like it's specifically this building and it has this many windows and it has this many doors in it. I want to be able to describe the poetry, the feeling of it, without trying to literally describe every little element in it. And so I think things like showing its movement, showing the sounds, showing the textures, the smells, those kinds of things I think are more important than the obvious facts of this many buildings and it's got to be this color. And if I can convey more of the emotion that you feel as you're driving down in a place like this and the movement, then I think I've captured something a little bit more interesting than just a literal copy or an interpretation of the scene. So the reference for this study was taken just with my iPhone from the back seat of a car as we're driving through LA, going to an art show. And it's something that was very spontaneous. So I took a bunch of photos just to see where a certain position might work better than another position in relationship to the cars, the road, the street. Also, I've cropped in on it in order to make it a little bit more of a contemporary design, like a squarish sort of feel to it. And the original photo is much larger. So just like when you're out in nature and you're looking at the Grand Canyon, there is so much that you could paint or include in the image. And usually it's much better to just paint a piece of it Same thing with the cityscape. You can get really overwhelmed with kind of the grand nature of it. Like these skyscrapers are enormous, and you could make a very large painting, make the cars even smaller. So one thing that I want to do is think about the relationship between the cars and the size of the cars and how much of the buildings that I want to include. Because again, if I include the entire structure of the buildings, then the cars get to be really tiny. And I think it becomes a little bit less interesting. So it's just like with Edgar Payne, for example, when he would paint the minarets in Yosemite, he would have to make a decision on how tall the trees would be in relationship to the peaks. And this is the same kind of thing here. So I think of this very much, even though it's a cityscape, it's very much like a landscape. And like the cars, I would think of them the same way as if they were boulders or, trees. That has a very similar kind of design element to it. Now, of course, everything here is much more angular. I'm dealing with a lot of rectangles. And in a landscape situation, you would have a little bit more of the kind of the spheres or triangles for mountain peaks, spheres for the trees. It's basically going down to these elemental basic shapes and then just seeing the size of these shapes and positioning them in an interesting way from left to right and from top to bottom and front to back, and making sure that there's some variation between the widths, the heights, and the depths here. So I started by making this really nice transparent dark, and you can see I'm connecting all the darks at first. They all are connected for the most part. And it's really important to connect your darks so that it establishes your value pattern right from the get-go. And now I'm going into more of the gray tones. And so I'm just seeing this in very much into a 3-value piece. I'll have some variations, but for the most part, it's, just those really dark areas, midtones, and then the light of the sky that makes this piece in its value pattern. So just trying to simplify it down at first, and then building the complexity in later.